Good Sunday and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and we're back again on Sunday, April 26, 2020. And we're still talking about the same things, COVID-19, politics, you name it. We're here to talk about it. And today we have a special show. We've gotten in a guest that I think everybody should hear. His name is Joyner. He's a professor of law at North Carolina Central Law School. He's also done a lot of work on civil rights and a lot of other things. He's going to be in with us to talk about how the president has handled his responsibilities in terms of the Constitution. The president has asserted a lot of authority that he may or may not have. So we want to talk about that. Val Atkinson is going to join us sometime during the conversation. As soon as we can get him into the conversation, we'll bring him in. And then we'll end up with Troy Williams. Troy is a columnist with the Fayetteville Observer, and he has a new piece out this week about the politicization of the coronavirus. So we want to talk to Troy Williams as well. In the meantime, we're going to take a real quick break, and when we come back, we're going to come into the interview with Joyner, and later we're going to try to get Val Atkinson in as we go along. You're watching The Deal.
Why should young people care about the spread of coronavirus? Well, we know that people with underlying medical conditions over the age of 60 are at highest risk, but they've got to get it from somebody.
So we're asking everyone to be selfless for others so that we can protect those who are most susceptible.
Not going to bars, not going to restaurants. It all just means physical separation so that you have a space between you and others.
For more information on how you can social distance, please go to coronavirus.gov.
Welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and as I promised, we want to start bringing in folks who could give us a better sense of what's going on here. Somebody you can believe other than just me and me running off at my mouth and saying that, you know, this is what I think. I want to bring in some people who have expertise in areas, and this time I found somebody that I think you will get a lot of. Joyner, he's a professor of law at North Carolina Central University. We are very fortunate that he has time to, and I guess everybody has time right now to come in and do things like this. Joyner, welcome to The Deal.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Well, you know, we all in America have a legal problem right now, and he sits at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And what really made me think about you, I was reading an article in the Atlantic on Wednesday, and it talked about the president's propensity to overstate what his ability to do constitutionally is, and it was in relation to him saying that he could adjourn Congress and do these recess appointments for judges, but he had previously said that he had the ability to do whatever he wanted. The Constitution under Article 2, he just says, Article 2, he doesn't really ever state any specific thing. He says, but my Article 2 powers gives me the ability to do whatever I want to. Talk to me about what you've heard from this president and how constitutionally he's either right, wrong, or somewhere in the middle. What is your take on how he's been couching his ability to do things under the Constitution?
Well, I think at the outset, Trump came into office under the belief that being the president was like being the king. And there are distinct differences between the governmental structure in the United States and in those states where there is a king or an autocrat that is in control. in the United States, each state is really like an independent country, except for those rights or those authorities which they initially gave up. That's identified in the Constitution. But the president has power and authority over the central government, which can really be viewed as like the 51st state. And the governors have authority over the affairs of the states. And in each state, there is the governor and the legislature, which then has the power to create laws and to execute laws in that state. Separately, though, there is the federal government, which is like a kind of amalgamation of powers given up by the states and focuses primarily on the execution of those federal powers and international affairs. So the president does not have supervisory authority or any other type of authority over what happens in the individual states, and they operate under this notion called states' rights. And then within the federal government, the president is merely 1/3 of that structure because there are three branches of government, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch, which the president is in. But the legislative branch is controlled by the Senate and Congress, the House of Representatives, and they make the laws that are in existence in this country. The executive has the responsibility of enforcing or executing those laws, and the judicial branch determines the interpretation of the Constitution and the laws. So it's a lot different than what a king would be able to do, where they are able to impose law and to operate independently of oversight by any other official agency of the government. So that's not what we have in the United States.
Well, obviously, the president, he ends up backing off what he said. Every time he'll throw out something and then he backs off of it. Earlier on in his presidency, and most recently last year, as we led up into impeachment, there was a lot of talk about what mechanisms you have to control the president. People kept talking about the 25th Amendment and that kind of thing. We clearly see that the death toll keeps escalating. This is a non sort of legal constitutional question, but a rational question. Have you seen anything like this where you have to rein in a president? I'm talking about in the entire history of the United States, where a president had to be reined in because he seemed just not to have the ability to understand what was going on.
There has always been a struggle between the various branches of government, more particularly the legislative branch and the executive branch. And there has been historically a tug of war between each of those branches as to the ultimate power that they have and that they exercise. And typically, the judicial branch is able to resolve those differences. The problem here with Donald Trump is that he has asserted authority and power over things that are properly within the purview of both the legislative branch and the judicial branch and Congress, because it is being controlled by Mitch McConnell, has failed to provide the type of oversight over the president and to rein the president in with his excesses. And that has been the problem that we are dealing with. The court moves slowly, and a lot of the things that Trump seeks to do they have refused to become judicially involved and allowing instead this battle between the legislature, which has kind of acquiesced to
Hmm.
what he is saying out of fear that they aren't going to be able to win their positions back again. So he has asserted more authority over the running of the government than any other president in history.
Right.
And a lame duck Congress in the form of the Senate, more or less, has allowed him to do so by failing to oversee, monitor, and curtail his attempts to exercise this broad notion of power that he has.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I want to remind the listeners that you're in with us on the deal with Ed Clark and Irv Joyner, professor of law at North Carolina Central Law School. We're trying to get some civics knowledge to the people because apparently there are a lot of people, Irv, out here who believe that the president actually has that authority. You are in front of law students. Let's talk about what you do during the day. You're in front of law students trying to teach them about the law. Even in that cohort of people that come to law school, is there a misunderstanding about what the president's power is and how the government works? Do you have to do a lot of undoing a bad civics teaching in the public schools?
It's an ongoing problem that we have. And a lot is due to the absence of civic education in the public schools, both at the junior high level and at the high school level, but also at colleges and universities. People just don't stop to study government, and it is no longer required that you understand the operations of governmental agencies and the various states. So people come in really ignorant of those restrictions, what powers do exist, and then how those powers are to be exercised. So constantly, you're going through an explanation to correct people with their understanding of these issues.
Yeah. So in the time we got left here, I need something hopeful or at least something we can point to. So I know that the president is not going to be able to run roughshod over this thing and that we were going to be able to deal with COVID-19, but also the upcoming election. So I'm going to switch gears real quick. We've mainly been talking about this in context of what he's been talking about with COVID-19. One of the things he's been talking about a lot lately is he does not like the whole notion of mail-in ballots, but we don't have a real federal election system like other countries do. Can you talk to me about what the problem's going to be in the fall in November if we're still quarantined? There's no 50 state, electoral process that each state runs kind of on its own. What kind of problems does that present, and why is that not dealt with in the Constitution? A country this large and diverse that we don't have a federal way to choose the president. I know that's a hard question, but and then I see we got Val Atkinson is going to be joining us in a minute, so he should be in with us as you answer this question, Irv.
Well, first of all, you have to remember that the Constitution was developed in the 1700s. Uh, that was some years ago, before any of us were around and able to participate in what's going on. And they did not have the kinds of problems that we find today. So that's the one that they didn't have the foresight that we would be in the kind of situation that we're in right now.
Yeah.
So and then they purposely sought to guard against presidential, people in the position of president who sought to expand their powers over and above what it was that the founders intended. And you have to think, that it is not though until after 1865 and then leading up to the 1950s, that the president has even attempted to gain the kinds of sway that it has today. So, it was not foreseen, got out of hand, and you don't have the kind of oversight that you need to ensure that the president stays in his proper position.
Irv, I wanted to chime in on. I came in when you were talking about when the Constitution was developed back in the 18th century, 1787 to be exact. And I am in my latest attempt uh, writing a piece on the Electoral College, and a part of that has to do with how and why we came up with the Electoral College. The fact that the framers wanted to get out of that Constitutional Convention and go back home, and they wanted to do it without losing any prospective member states. So that was a way the Committee of 11 came about to come up with something that everybody would agree to, and it has had its warts and problems and that sort of thing, but it was not designed for a 21st century America, and in no way of speaking. It's no way. And that's one of the reasons we're having many of the problems. I could go on, but many of the problems that we're having now. We have a modern electorate. We have a need for a modern president, but we don't have a modern documentation to ensure that the two do well.
I have real concerns, Val and Irv, that uh, the president may try to pull a okey doke and not allow the election to go even happen because we don't have this federal election system. Do either of you have any concerns that he could actually do something that would throw the election into turmoil or it not even happening? I'll start with you first, Irv.
Well, in response to that question, there is not legitimately in place any way that he can interfere with the elections short of declaring some type of national emergency that might exist under his powers. Typically, the running of elections, the administration of elections, will be left to the individual states because the states have the power to determine who can vote, how they can vote, when they can vote, where they can vote, and everything having to do with the election of everyone except federal officials. And then with respect to federal officials, then there is some congressional oversight, some congressional rules that are in place that governs that. But none of that has given any power of authority to the president to control the electoral process.
Right.
I would not be surprised if Trump does not try something that is designed to interfere with the operations of the elected. So, but it is without any legal authority that he has that's been provided to him by the Congress.
Yeah, yeah, and Val, the same question for you. We've talked many times on our program Connections on Fox 107 that folks don't understand the electoral system, and we're constantly in this battle trying to educate people on how elections work. And I know you have a thing right now where you're really on this electoral college piece of it because it's very problematic. Talk to me about. I know there's nothing we can do between now and November, but do you have any fears that we may run into some trouble when the time comes to vote?
Yeah, well, Irv is absolutely correct. I go back to the presidential election of 1860, when there was only one state that ended up in the Confederacy that allowed Lincoln even on the ballot. the other 10 states didn't even allow him on the ballot. Of course, he still won. But that goes to Irv's point that it's a state-run process right now. And the states decide how that's going to happen. But yet and still, my fear is, and we were talking about this, Irv touched on it, that some type of trumped-up national emergency could be called or claimed. And I could see Trump saying he's asked his Attorney General, Bill Barr, to look into it and uncover all stones and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And he wants to postpone the election until the report is finished as to whether or not our election has been compromised or whatever. I'm just going out on the deep end, but I wouldn't put it past them to try that. I think that the oversight of the House would become involved, and it may become a case for the courts to finally decide. And I think, although we have a very conservative court at this time, I think that we would have a little support. We, meaning sane people, would have a little support at that level.
Right. Yeah. Joyner, Val talked about the Attorney General, Bill Barr. I have some problems with him. I'm sure a lot of people do. What is your take? The other day, he was saying that he could possibly look into if states decided not to open up. There was, it blew up for a couple of hours in the news cycle. What was he talking about as far as the Attorney General and his ability to even do something like that, to force states to, in quotes, open back up? Do you know what he was using as the basis for that?
Well, I don't know that he was using anything, any legal support for that assertion, other than his own curiosity and efforts to appease the Trump administration and what Donald Trump was projecting. The Attorney General does not have authority over anything that happens in the states. Mm-hmm. And in that regard, each governor is responsible for deciding what happens when there is an emergency within their state and how they are going to deal with that. At points, the governors from various states can come together and agree cooperatively to engage in certain conduct or to regulate certain conduct, but in no instance does the Attorney General have any authority over any of the states other than to investigate an individual for violating federal law. Mm-hmm. And unless the governor is violating some federal law, then the Attorney General is no more than just an advisory body.
Right. Yeah, it just struck me as really odd that he would even make that assertion. And again, people not knowing any better, they would think that maybe he does have the ability to do something, and what that would be, I don't, what remedy, I don't know. Val Atkinson, I'm going to shift gears real quick, and we're going to go to the purely political aspect of the media coverage over what's been going on. One of the things that I've been bothered about is the media, constantly covered the president's daily corona briefings. And the news coming out of those briefings were dubious to me. Most of it was the president posturing. Your background is one of the things that you did do at North Carolina Central was teach media politics. And I want you to tell me how the media has actually maybe been to the detriment of actually getting good news out by covering these coronavirus briefings.
In detail was the whole business of how the media is, to a degree, tethered to the whims of, could be tethered to the whims of an administration. And that is, if you get somebody that's media savvy, like Donald Trump is, he understands the connection between drama, ratings, and advertising dollars. There is a direct correlation there.
Mm-hmm.
And he understands also how meeting how media rating systems work. We talk about Arbitron for radio, of course, and the Nielsen system for television. And big networks know that to have a network cover the president of the United States is excellent for ratings. And of course, Donald Trump is aware of that as well. So if he wants to give a daily briefing, there are very few networks who will say, well, I don't want to cover the president because he's just using this as a rally to get to his base. Well, that's when the media has to make a decision. Is this newsworthy? Is the public being treated fairly? And is this just an attempt to usurp the power and authority of the media and use the media to get to people who need to hear my message that's coming from Donald Trump?
Right.
I personally feel, excuse me, I personally feel that the networks need to really look at whether or not they are a witting or unwitting participant in a strategy cooked up by the Trump organization to give a more favorable time to him and to make up for the fact that coronavirus has almost killed the whole notion of rallies anymore, political rallies for the time being. So I'm real leery about the media's posture in covering the so-called coronavirus updates.
Mm-hmm.
Some MSNBC and CNN in particular have gone so far as to cover it on a sort of ad hoc basis and then come behind it after the meeting is over and sort of summarize what they think were the salient points without exposing the audience to each and every little idiom within the media presentation. So I hold out hope that they will stop flooding the airways with that. The last one I heard of was that he walked off, he meaning Donald Trump, walked off the stage without having questions after he made the suggestion about the disinfectant injections and
Mm-hmm.
and having light penetrate the skin. So
Right. Yeah. Which was completely crazy.
maybe that's a good sign.
Yeah, maybe that is a good sign. Irv Joyner, in the time we got left here, I want to go back to, and I asked this of everybody that's a guest the first time on the deal during this crisis is, how do you feel? What's going on in your world? You still have to interact with students, I presume, to some degree, but obviously that's probably changed on how you do that. What's happening at North Carolina Central Law School, and how are you interacting with those students? And then on a personal level, what's changed in your day-to-day that COVID-19 has impacted?
Well, Ed, technology is a lifesaver, and it has been a lifesaver for North Carolina Central and certainly at the School of Law. We had historically been a heavy user of technology. We have an outstanding IT department there, and so we had the infrastructure in place to quickly move to online classes. So in that sense, we've not missed a beat. We've been able to continue the instructions that we were engaged in before the crisis struck. We are now doing our exams over the internet, and we have a plan in place that everyone is comfortable with. So technology has been a lifesaver for us. These are different times, and they are scary times. Not only are they scary, but they also dangerous, since you don't know where the coronavirus infection will lie next. So you have to be careful, and we are being careful, staying in, working through technology to do all of the things that we previously were doing face to face. But we're doing well, and we're staying out of the mainstream and trying to keep the mainstream out of us.
Yeah, and Val Atkinson, we do this on Wednesdays and Sundays, and we still do our show on Sundays with the connection, and we haven't been able to do what we've done for nearly the last 25 years. You know, we're having to record remotely and all those things and try to deal with the technology and make it work. Over the last few weeks, I haven't asked you directly this on the program, but again, how are things going with you and your family and that kind of thing? And I'm sure it's starting to weigh on everybody. How are you holding up during the quarantine times?
I am holding up well, thank you. I appreciate the interest. My wife and I are doing very well. We are able to manage our day so that we are self-quarantined and still get to do the things we need to do out and about. The only concern that I have with this virus right now is that I have a 4-month-old grandson that I can't hug, that I can't be with when I want to for obvious reasons. So I will be just extremely happy when this thing is lifted, when we can get back to quote unquote normalcy. And I can really enjoy our new addition to the family. But right now, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I think it's a challenge for everybody. I have a granddaughter I haven't been able to see, and obviously I haven't been able to interact with any of my kids. They're all adults, but they have families and stuff, and can't interact with any of those folks. So it's been a trying time for everybody. First off, I want to thank Irv Joyner for taking the time to come in and be with us today. And Irv, I want you to come back if at all possible at some point. And obviously, I want to thank Val Atkinson, as always, for being here. And Irv, you want to leave us with anything? What should we be looking towards on the constitutional legal side of this thing as this continues to progress?
Well, we need to do two things. One is to make sure that we have complied with our census obligations and reporting. We need to encourage people to do that. Secondly, we need to be prepared to vote. We don't know what the future is going to bring, but what we do know is that we need to have a robust turnout of people in the November elections, and whether they are going to the polls to vote in person or they will have to vote by mail or by the internet, whatever the machinery is that's in place, we need to make sure that African Americans, Latinos, and other racial minorities are robustly responding to their duties to provide some decision about who our leaders will be in this state and particularly in this country.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end up here. And Val Atkinson, you get the final word today. What do we need to be looking at in the upcoming week?
I wanted to echo what Irv just said about the voting process. We still have the Voter Education and Participation Alliance with the Kappas of Durham, the Bull City Kappas, as they call themselves, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, we meaning Radio 1 of Raleigh. And we're still doing things, although we have the honker in place, as it were, or the social distancing that we're trying to adhere to. There are still things we can do. And what I've been pushing folks to do is make sure you check to ensure that you are still on the rolls. There are a lot of things can happen that people are taking off the roll all the time, inadvertently sometimes, and by chicanery others. Mm-hmm. But check to ensure that you're still on the roll. Check with your friends, your neighbors, your family members to ensure that those who haven't registered yet and are eligible to do so, that they register.
Right.
And during the time when it comes time to vote, become a Uber driver, become a taxi person for people in your neighborhood. Don't just accept somebody's word that they are going to vote. Help them to go down to vote if we are in that mode at that time. As Irv was saying, it could be by mail, it could be by internet, it could be by whatever means. But whatever means, make sure that you and yours are participating in the electoral process. It's very, very important. This is a directional changing election, folks. This election coming up on November the 3rd. It's a directional changing election for our country. So make sure you play your role. Make sure you have something positive to tell your grandchildren 20 years from now when they ask, what did you do and how did you do it on that big directional question in November of 2020.
Well, yeah, folks, you heard it from Val Atkinson and of course, from Joyner from North Carolina Central University School of Law. I want you to stick around. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have Troy Williams. He's a columnist with the Fayetteville Observer. Wrote an interesting piece about how coronavirus has been politicized. Troy used to be legislative aide for Congresswoman Alma Adams. So he'll be in with us to close out the show today. In the meantime, again, thanks to Val and Irv, and we'll be right back after these messages. Happy birthday to you.
I've never done this before.
Happy birthday to you.
We're here for Precious.
Happy birthday, dear Precious.
Day 4. You may not understand.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, this is chapter 32.
And welcome back to the second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. And as promised, I have Troy Williams with me. He's a columnist with the Fayetteville Observer, but he's a whole bunch of other things too. As a little kid, I knew him as the taller dude or taller dude that would come around sometimes, and he seemed pretty cool to me. And now he's done a whole bunch of different things. Troy Williams, welcome to the deal.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for taking time out to reach out to me again. We go way back. I'm like I said, I was an adult when you were still a child.
Right.
But I was on my way off to Vietnam when you guys were still doing what y'all were doing.
We were little kids, yeah.
God has blessed us to still be on the planet, and I appreciate what you're doing to help push the conversation forward.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit off mic before we started about just that being a columnist or writing the opinion. You can't get too full of yourself. You know that everybody's not going to agree, but that's the whole point of doing it. And the reason the reason why I wanted you on is the column that you wrote most recently in the Fayetteville Observer, and you can get it at the Fayetteville Observer website. Right now they have everything free on there, so you can get there and read it. It's called "Coronavirus Has Become a Political Disease." And let's just start with the basics, Troy. What were you trying to get at in the column? What is the basic premise of the column?
Well, the basic premise is this, that, of late, there is a lot of conversation about the coronavirus. Of course, this has been the most dynamic thing in my lifetime. I'll be 65 years old this coming August, and nothing has ever hit us like things have hit us concerning this. I've lived through the HIV AIDS era. It's called HIV disease now. And I would say that, the challenge with the way things are, the way we dealt with that versus then now, is that became a political disease. It was about homosexuality and alternate lifestyle and everything else. And this coronavirus is new on the map, and already people are talking about how it disproportionately affects African Americans.
Right.
I'm saying that, I think it's a little early to talk about exactly why. I think that the research needs to happen to say why it's disproportionately affecting African Americans. I'm not in disagreement with that. I'm just curious as to the why.
Sure.
What concerns me is some things that I've heard. I mean, through my contacts in the world, I've heard that there are a lot of people out there that are people of color, primarily African Americans, that, number one, they don't believe in science. I happened to run into a young man one day that I had to get a tire changed, and he was maybe late 20s, and he was pretty much adamant with me that this was a hoax and it's nothing more than the flu. Now, he could have had a PhD in epidemiology, but if that's the case, he probably wouldn't have been changing tires.
Right.
So, it's like we need to take a look at what we're doing here. I believe the science on this thing, there's a lot we don't know about it. I wish that more African Americans were in sync with the scientists. Now, I can see black folk in particular not trusting government.
Sure.
I don't blame them. When you look at the Tuskegee stuff that they done to black folk then, and even more recent things, experiments and things that have been done on Africans in general on the continent of Africa and other places, I don't blame anybody for not trusting the government. But, when you stand back and you look at this thing right here, you got to say, look, man, something's going on, and we got to protect ourselves. So
Sure.
Social distancing and not getting in large gatherings and shutting down barbershops and all these other things where people will come in frequent contact with each other. I don't see that as being an overreach for a community, particularly African Americans, for us to buy into that. I think that's something that we need to buy into. And from what I can see, people are not doing it.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I want to remind the folks you're listening to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. We're fortunate to have someone I've actually known since almost birth, I guess, on with us, Troy Williams. He's a columnist with the Fayetteville Observer, and we have some connection back to Harnett County, which we were also talking about before we came on. Troy, one of the things that's disturbed me over the last couple of days is the proliferation of cases in Harnett County. There's an outbreak at the Universal Healthcare right there in Lillington, and then there's been some pockets, even in Bun Level. There was 3 or 4 early on that were identified at Bun Level, and then of course there's been some deaths in Harnett County. I know that you have a background in a lot of different things. Can you tell the folks that about maybe some of your background that may give you some insight into public health and that kind of thing?
Well, my work primarily has always been in an investigative capacity in some kind of way. I was a cop for 12 years and I spent 8 years as a federal local drug agent. So the whole investigation realm of things is something that I've always kind of been latched into. Following that, I did spend a stint of about 5 years working directly for a program funded by CDC that dealt with HIV among African Americans. All of that come together for me to say that, hey, look, we did learn one thing. The basic health models that work to cause most people not to get infected with diseases don't necessarily work within the African American community. It doesn't mean that African Americans are necessarily doing anything wrong per se outside of the realm of the major populations, but we just don't take information. There's a whole lot that we just don't do the same way other people do it. Yeah. And I believe that when it comes to this coronavirus, that's what bothers me as well about this. I'm just wondering, are we really believing in getting the message? And are we still, I got to get a haircut. I got to get my nails done because I've heard a lot of underground things that they're doing. I believe those things can expose us to greater risk to get this virus when we could probably lower it if we weren't doing those things. Now, that's just what I believe. I don't have any empirical data to back it up.
Right.
But based upon what I've heard, I think that some of these things are factors in causing there to be a high rate among African Americans.
Well, shoot, I mean, it just seems reasonable and plausible from a common sense standpoint. You know, I mean, that's how I keep thinking about this. You know, at one point in my career, I worked for FEMA, and I traveled around the country, and I primarily worked in the South, you know, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and I would go into small towns, Troy, where I would go and say, well, you know, you qualify for a FEMA assistance or whatever, come down to the disaster center, and people wouldn't come. They just would not come, and I couldn't figure it out. And one time I was in Alabama, and these folks were like, well, I can't come because it might upset the boss man. And it turned out all these folks worked on a rice plantation in Bolivar County, Mississippi it was.
Wow.
And I would see that over and over in towns throughout the South, including North Carolina, where folks just were kind of detached from the regular system of things. I would take for granted that people would just go and listen to the authority or whatever. And you know, the only way I could normally get through to people is when they would finally see me on television. And what I would do is I would always try to get myself on television in one of those markets. They would see me, and then they would see me in the Piggly Wiggly, and they'd be like, "You the guy from the TV," and now I believe you, and I can go there. One of the things that I wish would happen in this crisis, and is that if there were some public service announcements and stuff, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this program. We've added an extra program every week. We normally on just on Sundays, but we've been doing a Wednesday program as well, just to try to get information out and maybe touch somebody that can touch somebody else, you know, and spread the word. And I'm pretty sure that was part of the HIV/AIDS education, is how do you get the word out? Is there anything you learned from there that you think may be able to apply here on how to educate people?
Well, it's interesting that you should bring that up. You know, the way that the African American community receives information is not generally how the major population receive information.
Right.
You know, some people think, well, look, what we need to do is go put it in the paper.
Right.
Well, you know, that doesn't work for a number of segments in the African American community because they don't read the paper like that. You know, They're not. We are more of an oral community, where the people listen to people, and like they say, they saw you on TV. Because we're watching the TV, you put something in the printed news, a lot of times it just doesn't work.
Right.
And the type of messaging that is applicable to African Americans can sometimes be so different when it comes to some of the other races, particularly white folk. And you know, I think that's what's getting us now. You know, okay, I see these ads on TV. I've received at least one or two things in the mail concerning the coronavirus, but these methods or ways of getting information to the population in general typically have not worked with African Americans, particularly when we look back to the HIV things that we tried to do. They just don't work.
Right.
And so what do? I think that we got to hit the ground running. We already know that the African American community normally does not process information the same way. Politicians even know that. I mean, That's why they go to the churches. You know, you don't have a situation where politicians are going to white churches. They don't do that.
Right. No, they don't do that at all, do they?
They don't do that. You know what I mean? But they go to the black churches. You know what I mean? I mean, so because, you know, that's what works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk to this preacher, we're going to get in front of this group and blah, 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 and do this thing. I mean, and I think that our salvation with this virus, because, you know, I have no way of knowing, but, you know, Dr. Fauci, whatever his name is, you know what I'm talking
Dr.
about.
Fauci,
He was the guy that was leading the the trip when we were doing the stuff with HIV. He was the one that came up with the different programs and the strategies to reach the African American community. That guy was the one.
Okay.
The one that you see on TV now, the same person. So, we got to hit the ground running with trying to see what we can do about this virus, this coronavirus, COVID-19, and its impact on African Americans. Because in the beginning, HIV, if you got HIV in 6 months, you were dead. Look,
Right.
This thing here, people are getting, and within a month they are dead.
Right.
So we need to do something. This is really, I think, going to be a crucial point for the world, if you will, but particularly for the African American community and our own salvation. We're going to have to get some people to believe. Now, look, I'm a faith believer. I'm a lay preacher and a lay pastor myself, but I'm not going to be telling someone that, hey, look, we're going to have church anyway. You know what happened to a number of ministries, the brother out of Richmond, Virginia.
Yep. Folks in Albany, Georgia. Yeah.
Right, and a number of other ones out there are deceased because they were just like, no, God's going to protect you. We get together, blah, blah, blah. It's not, bro, we're going to have to come up with a different program.
That is not a viable way to deal with a public health issue. And like you said, you're not disconnecting your faith from the situation. You're actually applying your faith. I think, to me, is that you're applying your faith. You're saying that, okay, I'm still going to pray. I'm still going to, I can actively do everything I would have done at church, maybe at home and now over the internet. But I'm going to try to do the public health thing, which is make sure we dampen the spread of this disease. I want to remind everybody you're listening to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. I'm lucky to have Troy Williams on with me. He's a columnist with the Fayetteville Observer. And his piece this week is called Coronavirus Has Become a Political Disease. I encourage you to go read it and then go back and read some of the other stuff. And Troy will attest to this because he knows that everybody doesn't like what he writes, but he doesn't shy away from saying what he believes, and I think that's because of where he's from.
Exactly. Well, look, you may have been around long enough to have met my dad. I don't know if you're not, but I'm named him, and so then anyone that knew him would understand.
I definitely. So, Troy, let me tell you this. I thank you so much for, on short notice, taking the time to be in with us today. I'd like to, be able to call you back at some other periods and get you on to talk about stuff.
I'd be glad to be on with you at any time. We can talk about anything you want to talk about. I'm not short on words or ideas or opinions.
That's good. So I got one last thing, though. Because, again, this is the political part of this that I think in the last few minutes we got here. Obviously, people are mad at the president. And then there's people on the other side that are mad at the Democrats, mad at Pelosi and all that kind of stuff. What do you think, just people being mad, how is that hindering actually us getting to a solution to this?
Well, I think, what's the comedian that had the accident? I'm trying to think of his name now.
Tracy Morgan. Yeah, Tracy Morgan.
Yeah, Tracy. Now, I think he said it all. He said, look, and he was, I'm about assured he's not a fan of President Trump.
Right.
But he said this a couple weeks ago. He said, look, let's stop trying to blame this man. Let's focus on trying to resolve this issue with this disease. He said, we're not in a situation or at a time now where we ought to be trying to blame anybody.
Right.
What we ought to be trying to do is to ensure that all of our efforts and energies are focused toward bringing a degree of wellness to our communities and to this nation and to this world. And that's what I believe is happening. But, of course, politicians are politicians. On my resume as well, I work with a number of politicians. I was a legislative assistant for a while in Raleigh for a couple of years, and I've worked for Congressman Alma Adams out of Greensboro. Being around these politicians taught me one thing. Look, at the end of the day, they're looking for political opportunities. And I'm not talking about her or any of them.
Right.
But specifically, but they look for opportunities to take an issue to push their agenda, not just that particular thing that's going on, but to be able to look down the road and say, look, we can get some mileage out of this.
Sure.
I believe that the president, if he believes that if he can turn it around, he can get some mileage out of it and then beat his chest and talk about how great of a guy he is. And the people that oppose him would rather that he not be able to be successful, which works against us, so that they can say he's a terrible person and he needs to be replaced because of it.
Sure.
The citizens wind up not winning when we have those type of environments. But I believe that people are going to have to become more educated, more informed, and we're going to have to make better decisions about who we elect for office, not based on political party, but about ideals and what they stand for.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you know what? That is exactly the right place to end up this conversation. I want to thank you again for taking the time to come in. I'm definitely going to call you back and have you back as much as we can have you on. I want to tell, and I want to tell the people again, the Fayetteville Observer. You can go there and find it online. This week's column is called "Coronavirus Has Become a Political Disease" by Troy Williams. He's a Renaissance man. He's done a whole bunch of different things, kind of like me. And then on top of that, you know, he is trying to look out for folks, trying to educate folks every time he writes, whether again you believe what he says or not, or wants to be on his side. He's always reasoned, and I think that's important. So Troy, thanks a lot for being with us today.
Well, thank you, sir. And again, I salute you, and certainly I am proud of your contributions and what you have become. And you know, in the midst of the struggle, brother, it's not easy to pull yourselves out of the neighborhoods like you and I came out of.
Right,
You
for
have
sure.
someone that was able to come out and do anything. Trust me. I salute you and bid you fare thee well. For just doing a great job. So, you know, thank you for having me on your show, and we wish you much success in all that you do.
All right, thank you so much, Troy.
Sure.
And that was Troy Williams, columnist with the Fayetteville Observer. I'm Ed Clark. We'll be back on Wednesday. I'll post who the guests are going to be for Wednesday. But in the meantime, go out and do something good for somebody. And I really do mean that. And we'll see you next Wednesday and next Sunday.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org.